Think about the last time someone needed you. Not wanted, needed. There was a problem they couldn't solve, a gap in their life that matched exactly what you carry. They reached out warm, full of gratitude and energy, and you thought, this is what people are for. You helped. You always do, and it felt like the right thing. Then the problem passed, and so did they. Not all at once. That would be too obvious. They faded. Messages came less often. The invitation stopped. You told yourself people get busy, that lives get complicated, that things drift. And then, a few months later, when something broke for them again, you were the first person they called. That moment of recognition, quiet and specific and slightly nauseating, is what Friedrich Nietzsche spent years trying to name. If this is already landing, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. Nietzsche was not a gentle philosopher. He had no interest in comforting anyone about how the world actually operates. What consumed him, book after book, from human, all too human to beyond good and evil, was the project of seeing through the masks human beings were to hide their real motivations from others and, more often, from themselves. In Human, All Too Human, written in 1878, he began excavating what actually lies beneath what people call friendship, loyalty, and love. What he found was not reassuring. Many of the bonds we assume are built on genuine affection are actually built on function. People stay close as long as staying close is useful. The warmth is real, but it is conditional in ways the person rarely admits, even to themselves. This is not cynicism for its own sake. Nietzsche was making a precise claim, that a specific kind of person, one operating from what he called a slave mentality and on the genealogy of morality, is incapable of giving without keeping account. They lack the internal resources to build something of their own, so they learn to extract value from those who can, not through force, through warmth and manufactured need, and the slow accumulation of your sense of obligation. He described this, in various forms, as the exploitative character of the weak, not the villain, not the enemy you see coming. The person who smiles, who flatters, who appears when they require something and goes quiet when they don't. The person who never quite returns what they receive and always has an explanation that sounds reasonable. His question was not whether such people exist. His question was whether you were paying attention. The first sign is the one you have probably already recognized, even if you have not yet let yourself fully name it. They appear during their moments of need. Not yours. Theirs. When something requires solving, when some resource is missing, when a gap opens that you happen to be positioned to fill, you become suddenly and intensely visible. The messages arrive. The warmth returns. There's a version of this person you remember appreciating, and that version shows up precisely when they need something from you. When the problem is resolved, the energy cools. This is the crucial point. It is not the ordinary drift that comes with busy lives. Busy people still check in. They ask how things are going. Remember what you mentioned last time? Send the occasional message with nothing attached to it. What a person using you cannot sustain is contact without function. Without a need to fill, the relationship runs out of reason to exist. Nietzsche observed in Human, All Too Human, that people frequently mistake habitual proximity for genuine care. Someone who reaches out regularly may be doing so for reasons that have nothing to do with you as a person. Someone who reaches out only when things fall apart is not your friend in any meaningful sense. They are treating you as a resource. The difference is significant, and most people spend years not wanting to see it. The test is not how they treat you when they need you. They're always warm then. The test is how they treat you when they don't. The second sign is harder to read because it disguises itself as concern. When you grow, they become anxious, not proud, anxious. A genuine friend notices your progress and feels something close to relief because they never needed you to remain limited. Their gladness cost them nothing. A person using you cannot afford your growth. The more capable you become, the harder you are to draw on. Self-assurance makes you harder to manage. Real independence changes the equation entirely. Financial stability, social connections that don't run through them, a sense of self that no longer requires their approval. All of this threatens what they have quietly built around your dependency. Your growth disrupts the arrangement, so they find subtle ways to resist it. They frame worry as care. They question your timing, see doubt about your readiness, and do all of this while appearing to have your best interests at heart. Nietzsche described this tendency through his analysis of ressentiment, the particular bitterness that grows in people who cannot build for themselves and therefore need others to remain beneath them. This is not simple jealousy. Jealousy wants what someone else has. This is more structural, the need for you not to have it, because your having it disrupts the dynamic they depend on. Watch what happens when you share good news. A person using you does not celebrate. They calculate. And their next move is almost always to find out what your progress can do for them. The third sign is where something changes. It is no longer about what they take. It is about what they do when you stop giving. When you cannot help, when you have your own constraints, your own needs, or you simply decide this particular thing is not yours to carry. A person who has been using you does not accept that as a practical reality. They make it about your character. You're selfish. You have changed. You used to be the kind of person who showed up. Your reduced availability becomes evidence of something wrong with who you are, and this translation happens fast. Nietzsche understood this move precisely. On the genealogy of morality, he argued that moral language, the vocabulary of selfishness and virtue, good and evil, is frequently not a neutral description of human behavior. It is a tool. Those who cannot access what they want through direct means learn to access it through guilt. The accusation of selfishness is not a sincere moral observation about your character. It is pressure wearing the costume of disappointment. The tell is in the timing. Before you said no, your character was fine. The moment you set a limit, your character becomes the subject. That pattern is too consistent to be accidental. What you are witnessing is not someone's genuine moral concern for the person you are becoming. It is a mechanism. If this video is giving you something to think about, subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps us keep making content like this. A genuine relationship can absorb a no. It may be disappointed or need time to find its footing, but does not immediately reframe your limit as evidence of your corruption. The relationship that survives only as long as you give without resistance is not a relationship. It is an arrangement. And arrangements, in the moment, you become too expensive to maintain. The fourth sign requires the longest time to name, because it hides inside ordinary life. Everything moves in one direction. Their problems get examined. Their plans, their fears, their crises fill the available time. When you bring your own difficulty to the surface, something happens without anyone deciding it. The subject finds its way back to them. The conversation settles, naturally and without apparent effort, on their concerns. You walk away having helped and having been unheard, and you file it under the explanation that some people are just like that. Nietzsche wrote in Human, All Too Human, that certain associations persist not because they serve both people, but because inertia is easier than honesty. The person benefiting from the arrangement never has to enforce it. They simply never create the conditions for anything else. Over years, the groove gets worn deep enough that both parties accept it as the shape of the relationship. One gives, one receives, and the exchange goes unnamed. The simplest diagnostic is this. Think about the last time they asked about you without needing something in return. The last time they stayed in the conversation after their problem was resolved. Not because they had another request, but because they wanted to know what was happening in your life. If you cannot point to an example, you are not remembering badly. Now comes the part that is harder to sit with. Nietzsche was not interested in positioning people as passive victims of others' manipulation. His entire project moved in the opposite direction, toward what your participation in a dynamic reveals about you. Because if you look at this pattern long enough, something else comes into focus. Being needed provides something real. Purpose. The particular warmth of feeling irreplaceable. Giving to someone who never gives back still produces a feeling. And for many people, that feeling is more accessible than the uncertainty of a relationship built on genuine mutuality. Genuine mutuality means both people have to show up as full people, with their own needs visible, their own limits real. That is harder and less predictable than the role of the one who helps. Nietzsche was deeply suspicious of what he called the morality of self-sacrifice, not because he thought generosity was worthless, but because he noticed how often endless giving performs itself as virtue while functioning as self-abandonment. In Beyond Good and Evil, he wrote about the person who gives past the point of health and names that giving is love, while avoiding the more vulnerable act of asking for something in return. The giver has found a way to feel significant without ever risking the exposure of their own need, without ever having to be seen as someone who also requires care. This is not an accusation. It is an observation about how the arrangement survives from both sides. The question Nietzsche actually leaves you with is not how to identify the person who has been using you. Some part of you already knows. The real question is what it would cost you to stop being available in that particular way. Whether the role itself has been providing something you have not yet admitted to needing. There's a reliable way to find out what a relationship is. Stop giving for a while. Not as punishment, not as a calculated test, but because your own needs exist and have been waiting. Then watch what remains. Real connection survives that pause. It adjusts. It continues. What does not survive is the arrangement. Without your function, without the warmth manufactured around your usefulness, there is nothing left to hold it together. Its disappearance is not a loss, even if it registers as one. What you lose is the illusion that someone else's need for what you provided was ever the same thing as caring about who you are. Nietzsche's answer to all of this is not suspicion. It is not a set of tactics for managing difficult people. It is something starker and, in the end, more useful. The willingness to see what is actually in front of you without softening it into something more comfortable than it is. Some people will only ever want the version of you that costs nothing to be around. The people who were never just using you do not need you to be endlessly available. They were there for reasons that do not expire when you stop giving. Thank you for watching. More videos are on your screen now. And if you haven't already, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.